Oh, hi. Welcome back to the workshop. So this video is going to be on color theory. A lot of people have been asking me to make a color theory video, and I never got around to it because there's so many videos on the topic, but I figured I'd do a personal take on color theory and my applications, which is going to be a little bit unique compared to whatever content is out there. So I don't have an editor. It's just me, and I like to spend all my time drawing, so the editing is going to be janky and the video is going to be janky, but it should get the point across. I'll try to give you guys a concise view on my take on color theory and how I apply it. Obviously, this is not going to be everything on color theory and colors. It's just the aspects that are most important to me and how I go about putting it in my paintings. So the first concept I wanted to get across is absolute color versus relative color. If you don't know what it is, basically absolute color accuracy is when I pick a color and I paint that color and I pick another color. Let's go around the wheel. Let's say I look at this color and I wanted to get the same color again. Maybe I'll choose this. And that's pretty close, but it's not absolutely the right color. So how accurately can I get the colors to match? That's what I would consider absolute color. Relative color is basically how the colors look compared to the colors around it. And that's more important than absolute color for us. An example of a use for absolute color is when if you're doing spray painting on a car, you want the colors to match exactly so that if you're touching up a car or a scratch, you want the colors to match exactly because if it doesn't, then it will show up weird, right? And you use color picking, or in the real world, you use colorimeter to pick out the exact color for the spray painting. But when we're painting a picture, we care about relative colors more. So in this case, instead of using color pickers and colorimeters, we use color perception and we use descriptions to adjust our colors as we paint. This might not make sense right now. I'll give you some examples later. And another tip I wanted to bring up right now is avoid sticking to symbolistic color choices. So things like grass is green, sky is blue, water is blue, fire is red, stuff like that. You end up picking very cartoony colors. Not that it's bad to use those colors to start your palette, but you should not limit yourself to these colors based on the subject matter. So I want to share with you how I got from these. So these are from 2022, these three, to these, which are from 2025. So about 3 year difference. I'll say objectively they're better paintings than my 2022 paintings, thankfully. But they're not only due to colors. Obviously, I have improvements in other aspects of drawing, like shapes and composition and design and anatomy. So not everything is color, but there is a common denominator is the brush I used from 3 years ago are, I think with the exception of like one or two brushes, are the same exact brushes I use now. So these two are, similar in color scheme, and they're the exact same brushes pretty much. And obviously the results are different. So a lot of it is due to color control. Unfortunately, I do have to talk about the color wheel a little bit. I know every single color theory video or class brings up the color wheel, but it's kind of unavoidable. So I'll just go through the parts that I think is important for this video and isn't really talked about a lot. Mixing colors. In this case, a lot of you might think mixing colors with like a blend tool or something, but for me, when I paint, I normally just use a brush. It has some opacity settings. So if I'm mixing colors, let's say I want to mix orange or red into this yellow, okay, not that brush. I just blend by going lightly over the existing color, and sometimes I get the right color, sometimes I don't. It depends on how the software processes color, and every software is a little bit different. But because I pick colors manually, it doesn't matter that much what software I'm using, what limitations it has, as long as I understand how colors work fundamentally. So how colors work is if you blend yellow with red, you get orange, right? You can deduce this pretty easily if we just look at the color wheel. Let's erase this and put it on differently. We could say, we can say something like, if we mix yellow here with red here, we get somewhere in the middle, which is orange. And you would be right. And we can apply this all over the wheel. So if we mix red and blue, right here, we get somewhere in the middle. So we get like some purple, pinkish color, magenta, whatever you want to call it. But we basically get the middle of the two hue angles. So there's actually an angular designation for for hue. So red starts at 0 degrees, and then 360 goes all the way back to red. And then we have somewhere right around 180, which is right across from red, in maybe cyan, some kind of greenish blue, cyan, teal, whatever you want to call it. So we can actually mathematically determine this if we wanted to. So if we blend something like 0 degrees and 66 degrees, we get 33, which is right around, right around there, something like this. So 66 would be right around here, maybe here, and then 0 degrees. I know this is not 0, but 0 should be here, but this is red. So we get somewhere in the middle, so 33, right around here, right? It's very close. It's more saturated because this image doesn't go up to the full saturation, but it'll be right around here. And this applies here. Red to blue, so red is 0 degrees, and blue is, well, actually, it will be on the other side. So 360 degrees, and then blue is maybe here. 234, so that's going to be right around here. Right. So again, it's a little bit more saturated than this wheel can go, but we can see the logic. However, the way you blend colors in real life, for example, with oil paint or acrylic, is a little bit different because when you mix the pigments, they lose overall saturation. So we can think of it as a pretty good approximation with how colors work. It's not exactly like this, but if we take two colors, so let's say yellow and red, these two colors, and we mix them, instead of going around the outside and maintaining 100% saturation, we actually take a straight line here. So right here would be the color that we get from mixing. Let me see if I can actually get that. So here, and then if we drop this down to 50%, the way it's the way the software processes color might not be the same, so I don't know if this will work completely or perfectly. It does work pretty well. I can't really see the color in here, or I can't really see where I painted the color, right? I can see the JPEG artifact, so you can see that it's, let me see, yeah, it's pretty much the same color. So if we take a straight line from, let's say if I mix colors that are wider apart, so let's say yellow and magenta, I should get red, right? Yellow and magenta. So if we take a straight line here, from here to here, we should arrive somewhere right here. So let's do magenta, and then we do 50%. Okay, 50% yellow. We should end up somewhere right here. So it's a little bit different. Should end up somewhere over here in terms of saturation. So it wouldn't be all the way up here. But let me see if I can get the Yeah, so saturation wise, it's pretty close. It's too bright because I think how this color wheel was made is too bright in the center. This is like a mix between how light works and how paint would mix. If you mix paint like red and blue or red and cyan, if you mix oil paint, you will actually get a darker color, I believe, than this. But it still demonstrates that the saturation is going to be low. And that's the most important part here. The accuracy is not as important. But what happens when you mix opposite colors? Because on the wheel it's a little different. So let's take actual blue. Let's take blue. And then let's take yellow. Whoops. So we get this gray. Yeah, it's perfect gray. Mid gray. Oh, the value is actually correct. But we get this mid gray. It's basically fully desaturated. There's like a little bit of saturation. It might be because like pick the color wrong. But you get mid gray. So if you want to get your yellow towards more blue, you have to just desaturate it. There's no, like, if you want to get yellow closer to orange, you just go more orange, right? If you want to get yellow closer to this cyan, then you just go green because it will travel from here this way. So you'll lose some saturation in the middle, but you'll still get green. So this is basically how I think about color. Basically how I think about color blending and transitions, specifically transitions. And if you think like this, it'll solve some of your problems for how color transitions through different bands of light. So let's look at the issue here in the 2022 and the 2022 paintings. A lot of times it's just avoiding the symbolistic color choices. If I say, the character has blue hair and I just paint blue, that will work starting out, but how do you get the transition colors? How do you get the highlights and stuff? Do you just go blue hair? So if I go highlight, I just go brighter blue. Like I just take blue and then I take a brighter blue. Like I just slowly inch towards white, right? That will not work 100% of the time. Obviously, it does work like that sometimes. And then for the people who have some information about color theory already, maybe you got it from other videos, you might think, I have a yellow light source. So instead of using blue, right, like here, I'll just use yellow. I'll just use a little bit of yellow for the highlight. And that will get you pretty close. That gets you a better result. And some of you more experienced might say, okay, I'm gonna use a blend mode. I'll use soft light or overlay. Let's say overlay. And I'll just use pick a light source color like yellow, or slightly orange. Let's do slightly orange. And then I can just paint over this. It'll give me a highlight that's kind of has that lighting information. And you see some of it turns green because I am mixing this orange with like some cyan here, and it'll go towards green. The way that blend mode mixes color is different from normal mode, so you can't really rely on the 100%. You can't rely exactly on the color wheel thing we talked about, like this right here. This doesn't work in all blend modes because the blend modes they kind of do stuff. They have an algorithm to do stuff a little bit weird. So like this is great. You can color and shade like this, and give you more kind of spontaneous chromatic effects, and you don't have to work as hard thinking about the transition colors, and it'll give you a pretty good effect. The reason why I think this works is because it limits your range of color. So let's say if I'm on this painting and I'm choosing a color, say I'm on blue hair. I have blue hair. And I say I want to choose a highlight. Then I kind of have to think, okay, do I just Do I just go this way? Or do I go here? Like now I have the whole range to work with. Whereas if I just use a layer option, like a overlay, and I just, pick orange-ish yellow, then I only have to think about the lighting color, the light source color, and the rest the computer will take care of for me. So it limits what kind of adjustments I can make to my colors, and that makes the colors end up more harmonious. So this is a good time to talk about different color types. So you have analogous colors, which just means you have one primary color and you have two colors to the left and right of that hue that you pick. We can pick any primary color, and then if we just pick the two, pick two ranges that is close, then we get analogous, right? And then we can see complementary colors is just the opposite. If you mix them, they turn gray. And then we have something like the triad colors. So yellow, cyan, magenta, it's triad. It's just 120 degrees from each other. And we can rotate this and we'll get different triads, right? So these will be triads, these will be triads. And you can use this to kind of build your color palette. There's also square colors. And you'll see these terms pop up on some YouTube videos talking about color theories, and these are square colors, and you can say square colors, if you rotate it like this, these are the square colors. So and you can do this to do your color palettes, and I never do this because I think the knowledge is important, but the way I use it is not like I will just design my painting around triad colors or square colors. That I don't think is very useful. So let's go back to this example. Why, besides the brushstroke and the shapes being bad, why is this color less appealing than something like this? And we can kind of explain it with there's yellow, blue, and red. Yellow, blue, and red. So I'm all over the wheel. Whereas this, overall it's red and orange. Red, orange, and yellow. So we have analogous colors. You can come back and explain it after the fact that it's been painted, but that's not how I arrived at this painting. I think of colors the same way I think of black and white drawings. So values. How sharp do I want something, and how soft do I want the transitions to be? If I want something to be sharp in black and white, then I would choose very bright values like here versus here. It's black to white. So the transition is sharp and the contrast is sharp. So you get high contrast. Like for example, the eyes, the pupil is next to the skin, which is darkened. It could be a combination of blush and shadows. And that's how you get high contrast in values. But in colors, you get high contrast by going far away. So if I want high contrast, I go yellow to blue, right? If I put blue next to yellow, I'll get a really, really high contrast. Like if I zoom out on this, your eyes immediately goes to that. And I use this concept to choose my colors. So that's why you can see kind of blue in here, blue and purple here, because I want those areas to be high contrast. This is more like purple, which is really far away from orange. So even if the values are similar, even if the values here are pretty similar, there's not a lot of value spikes besides the hair, but within the skin, the value spike is not that much. But with a angular variation on the hue, I can add more contrast than just the values of being darker or brighter. So this is how I think about color. This is basically the main way I think about color. If I wanted lower contrast, then I'll use similar colors. So for example, here, I want lower contrast, so I go orange and then red, like more reddish. So there's not that much contrast. Obviously, a lot more goes into this, like there's the edge fidelity, like how sharp the edge is and values. But even in here, I don't want the contrast to be huge. I want some contrast, but I go orange to red. Orange to red, the contrast is not very high. but it gets really high when it, goes to white, and then you can see there's a little bit of blue in here. So I want the contrast to be really high in the pupil, but not the entire iris itself. So that's why I put a little bit of blue in here, or it looks blue. Now I'll touch up on this later. So some of it is blue. And I don't really put much blue out here. There might be some, no, there's just the saturated. So I don't put much contrast between here and here in terms of colors. But I put more contrast in here within the pupil versus the rest. That's how I control contrast. Yeah, how I control color. And you can see this everywhere, how I want to do separations. Here you have a little bit of purple on the edge versus orange versus still orange on the other side. So reddish. So we can also see that in this. And here the background is mostly red. I wanted some contrast in the background, so I threw in some blue. Some blue over here. But because I wanted more contrast, the whole thing is really sharp already. But I wanted more contrast between the hair and the background, so I put red on blue. So they're almost opposite of on the color wheel, right? I have red here, and then I have blue here. So this line right here is going to be high contrast. So are, these lines where it's kind of bluish tone and then very red. Also, the skin is kind of greenish, right? It's greenish here, yellowish, and that's right next to red, which has some separation. So this is how I think about colors. It's relative to what they're next to. So a lot of times it's not pick a pretty color and go with it. Like, oh, I want pretty colors for hair. Like, you can't really say what color hair this is by looking at the individual colors. But if I were to zoom out, right, I can look at this overall and say, oh, maybe this person has like an opal color scheme hair, or like maybe white hair, maybe light bluish hair. You can say that because our brain's pretty good at taking the average information about color and saying what color it is. But if I were to zoom in here and I pick the colors, like here's red, here's blue, here's green, there's all kinds of colors. So that's why relative colors matter way more than absolute colors. If you try to study this painting and you try to pick the colors, it will never work. You can't really do that because there's so much noise, there's so much different transitions on colors, and this is on purpose. Not to discourage people from studying my paintings, but just because I want this effect, right? I want to play with colors a little bit in this painting. So let's look at more examples of that. In terms of contrast, here is a good example of where the contrast is really high, where I have like pretty much bright cyan here versus red. So cyan's here, red's here. They're complete opposite, and not only that, but the values are complete opposite. So this cyan is like really bright, and then this red is pretty much almost black. So that's how you get really high contrast. So even when I'm zoomed out, you can easily notice this point right here because of how sharp it is. So let's talk about the difference between a colorful painting and a highly saturated painting. Not mutually exclusive. In fact, they almost go together. But just because you have a really high saturation in your painting doesn't mean it's going to be described as colorful. So we can see this, you can kind of say it's a colorful painting. It has really high saturation. If I go and pick this out, all the saturation is almost like peaked, like it's pretty high. And down here, it's pretty much, it's like near the top 20%, 15% of saturation, and in the most saturated, in the highest chroma areas. Let's look at this. Also really high saturation, really high chroma. But the colors, they just don't look right. And it looks kind of, some people will call it muddy. Like we have these colors, it's kind of muddy here. Could be due to texture, but some of it is due to color. We can also see here, some people might describe this as muddy. And we have some, oh, let me take this out. We have some high saturations here. But you wouldn't describe this as very colorful still, compared to stuff like this where it's very colorful. But if we were to pick the colors here, yeah, it's still somewhat saturated, but most of the painting is this, like pretty low saturation, right? Or pretty low chroma or saturation. Same thing here. There's some places that looks very bright, but if we look at how saturated this is, it's not like this would be pretty saturated. But even this is not as saturated as this. But we can say these parts are very bright, they're very colorful. So even this, say it's full of color because of the neighboring colors. So let's look at the background here. It's almost just gray. This is almost just gray. So next to a bunch of grays, even a little bit more saturation is going to look very colorful. So this right here looks very blue compared to the grayish background and the black hair. So a lot of times the colorfulness of a painting is exaggerated by having it next to grayer colors, not just by tuning up the saturation to 100%, like what I did here. Like if I were to, even if I were to increase the saturation, yeah, like it has a lot of bright colors, but would you really say it's more colorful than this? Like most people would say, oh, this is very colorful, has the colors work well together and it's very colorful. Whereas they say this is just oversaturated. I painted this as a demonstration of how you can get really colorful paintings by using, mostly yellow. You kind of need more because yellow is, when you get brighter, it starts going to white. But, most of this is under 50%. I'll say under 25%. No doubt you would say this is a colorful painting. So the way that this is achieved is by going, kind of around the color wheel, but not only that, but making sure that I place colors that have a bit of angle variation next to each other. So for example, this purple right here next to the orange, purple right here next to orange, that's like 60 or 100 degrees, 120 degrees separation. The green next to the red, so the green's all the way over here, red is all the way over here. So these parts will look more chromatically spicy. So I'm gonna coin that term right here. They're chromatically spicy. So that's how sometimes I get more color out of a mostly gray painting. And I can drop this even more. So let's drop this to here. We can still say this is a colorful painting. It's like it has quite a bit of color variations in it. But if we look at what color it truly is, it's mostly just gray. Like most of this is pretty much all gray. It's like in the bottom. I mean, yes, I can make it more saturated to make it more colorful, but then it becomes too spicy. There's now too much saturation. And we don't really need this in paintings. We don't need to just dial it all the way up. Now it looks terrible as a painting. But when you have a painting that's low saturation overall, the viewer's eyes kind of adjust to it. It's kind of like going to a bright room or going into a dark room, sitting there for a while, and then your eyes adjust to the darkness of the room. You can see a little better. Color works the same. If you start just spamming bright colors in your paintings, then you know the saturation only goes up to here. You can't go further than 100%. So use it sparingly. So you might be wondering, that's all great. Like the concept's all great. How do I practice? How do I practice, or how do I get better at coloring? How do I practice? That brings us to this. So I think this is a good painting to study, or a good photo to study, because it has very subtle colors that are easily explainable. We only have to consider main light, bounce light, and base colors. So base color of lemon is yellow, and to avoid symbolism coloring, I see some of my students do this sometimes, is they think, okay, uh, orange or lemons are yellow, so if I were to paint this painting, if I were to paint this, never color pick, by the way, never do this and then just start doing this. Don't do that. That that takes away a lot of the practice you'll get from painting. So always look at the color and just pick it. So a lot of people might think orange or lemon is yellow. So I'm just gonna pick a yellow color. I'll just go, right? That's just paint this. And then they will say the towel in the background is white. So they might just pick like an off-white color and then fill it in. And then the shadow is kind of gray. So we'll pick a gray color and then just fill in the shadows. And then we'll just use a brighter yellow for the inside of the lemon. And then a darker yellow for the outside of the lemon in the shadows. This will get you a pretty good starting point. But as you get closer, or as you render more and more, you start realizing like the colors are not matching correctly, because if you're more observant, you might see something like here where you can kind of tell that it's red, like it's reddish, right? And then some of you might say, oh, actually the shadow of the towel is blue, or looks blue. This part, see, it's a little bit blue. And this is fine, but it still looks a bit too simplistic. As we adjust the color, like fine tune it, like this will work. I can just keep going like this. But the problem is fine tuning it. Like how, if you don't see the colors, if you can't observe it and you can't describe it, then you're not going to be able to paint it to the accuracy that you're able to actually see. A lot of people always say train your eyes when you're drawing. It's more like training your mind to be more picky about things. So when we look at colors like this, a lot of people would think, okay, we cut the shape out and then we just block in the color, which is correct. But what happens when you start getting into the minute details? Then you have to ask yourself, like, what exactly is this color? When I put down colors, I will pick a color. I'll just think, okay, this is kind of like bluish purple. It's a bit desaturated in the shadows of the towel. So I'll put down a color and I can compare this over here versus the actual reference. And compare the whatever I painted with the actual reference. I can say, describe to myself, what are the differences between this color right here and what the reference is. You can go and color pick it. It'll give you the right answer. There's a way to get the right answer, but it's important to practice yourself and say, okay, I think this is too purple. So what do I mean by that? This is too purple. If I want it the same color, I have to go here and I'll have to go towards the green. This is a greener blue. So I'll go a little bit towards green. I'll paint that. I'll say, okay, maybe this is closer. And it's not necessary to check, but I can say, okay, I'll check the color. Like, is it close enough? Like, I would say, actually, it's a little bit more purple than what I just adjusted. But, you know, at this point, it doesn't really matter. Like, I can't immediately tell the difference. So, it's important for you to describe to yourself, like, is the color that I put down correct? And which direction does it shift? Is it more towards blue, more towards purple? Is it brighter? Is it darker? Like, is this brighter or darker? It's about the same value because we just tested and I know it's about the same value. So I can use this to block. But then what about this orange here? This orange or even this block right here. So here's where it gets interesting for me. When I pick colors, I have this blue, right? I know the color right next to it is very similar because the transition is very shallow. So I could paint here. But I know it's more red. So I could go towards purple. There's a couple ways to do this. I can do towards purple. I can paint that in. And if I say, okay, I don't know if that's right. It looks too purple. I can say it's right now it's too purple. It looks like it's orange. And what we know about orange and blue is like it's almost on the opposite side of the spectrum. Remember what I say about if you're traveling through a very huge angle, like a huge arc length, you will travel through like the gray zone, right? Like if we travel through from this blue to this orange, we're going to travel through the gray zone. So if I want this blue to be more orange, then what I have to do is not only do I have to move towards purple, I have to desaturate it a little bit. That'll get me towards a more orange look within the blue. I think we can exaggerate the effect by doing this. This now looks orange, right? So that effect, but this effect is I'm exaggerating it, but this in the photo is the same type of effect, except it's even more subtle than that. So remember when I say paint or draw what you see, not what you think you see. So your brain might think, okay, this is a lemon, so I see yellow. So whatever this is, it's yellow. But really, it's if you think about this, like if you see it in isolation, if you see this in isolation, you can say it's orange or dark orange brown hue. So why are we putting yellow here? We could just go to orange. This is probably pretty close to the color. Like just and it's not the same color, and I can say it's not the same color. I'm looking at it and say it's now I have to describe it to myself. Like what is the difference? It's less dark, so we'll go up. Actually, it's not that much less dark. And it's more saturated. Like it's almost like it's reddish. And then the edge, the inside where there's ambient occlusion, it gets just a little bit dark. Okay, I would say that's pretty close, and we can check this by, let's pick the color here. I don't usually check the color because I just like to do visual verification, but just to prove a point. That's pretty close. I'm slightly more desaturated. So one thing to note that is if your neighboring colors are not fixed, like all this color is not accurate, whatever you're trying to put down is not going to be accurate. So that's why I always say don't paint in isolation. Don't paint your character in isolation without the background. Always, add something in the background. Don't just leave it white or gray, because then it'll really screw up your color perception. After all, the color only works in conjunction with the neighboring colors. You can't just look at a color in isolation and say, oh yeah, that's pretty and that's nice. So to show you guys with this same method. So here's my study of that lemon. That lemon painting. You can see I've exaggerated a little bit just because, painting is you do have artistic freedom in painting stuff even in studies. I exaggerated this a little bit, so I went a bit more saturated for the red. So describing the colors to yourself in just plain English or whatever language you guys are used to thinking in. So like if this is blue and I put down a color and it's not blue enough or it's not purple enough and I have to move it towards a certain direction. Describe that to yourself and then just do the thing that you described and see if you can get it closer. It's kind of matching your perception, your mind to how you actually see with your eyes, like physically. And this is why I don't like the separation between warm and cool colors. Some people might say everything here is warm, everything here is cold, and they would suggest things like, oh, if you're here, then you just go warmer. Like which direction? Do you go here? Do you go here? And do you just add red to it? Do you add purple to it? Like which direction do you go? Do you just go towards yellow? You go this way. So this is why I don't like the warm and cold distinction between colors. And like, is this considered cold and this is considered warm, or is this considered warm? So it's hard to draw the line between cold and warm, and it's a little bit too ambiguous for me. I like just describing, like calling it the way you see it. Don't try to put too much label on things. One advice: don't try to put too many label on things. Just describe it the way that a 5-year-old will understand. Like a 5-year-old can understand this. This is green, and then this is yellow, and so this is a yellowish green. This is more, this is more yellow than this. Like anybody can understand that. And build your intuition and perception on something that's simple to understand. You can't mistake in it, and it's not ambiguous. That's way better than trying to categorize, over analyze things. So once you can get that, you can study colors more effectively. Now, there is kind of another level to colors. Like once you can see colors and you can mimic how it appears in real life, you know, I get to things where I practice stuff like this, where it's not really a realistic color scheme, but it works. Where I choose to put the saturation, there is some logic to it. There's some, you know, physics-based logic to it, like subsurface scattering, uh, like ray tracing, bounce light, stuff like that. But there is also artistic input. So the way you train for this is a little bit different. It's just addition to whatever we just talked about. And maybe I'll make a future video because this video is getting way too long, but maybe I'll make future videos if this is something people want to see, if like my take on colors and values is what people want to see. If you still have issues with doing color studies, and you're new to the field of art and you're thinking I need to do color studies, I will urge people to start with value studies first. The reason why you want to start with value study is because you're studying one axis in isolation. So one axis as in like how dark and light a value is. It's on the it's part of color. So you can have a really dark red, right? You can have a really bright red, and then you can have a really, okay, let's say low saturation red, but you can also have a low saturation dark red, darker red. So these are the same saturation, but they are different in values. So if you're playing with colors, then you have to worry about, okay, like there's higher saturation, you know, I can go here, and I can create a higher saturation red with the same value. Now that's the second axis. And then the third axis is I can have the red, but I can make it slightly more purple. And now it's a different color. Now there's three axes to it. That's why a lot of times colors are represented in three-dimensional space. But if I just study black and white, I only have to care about, you know, this value versus this value. One is darker than the other. Then I'm done. So you still study a component of color in isolation, and it trains your perception even faster than trying to mess with three axes. Because if you're not used to telling the difference between, you know, like this versus this versus that, if you can't tell that this is just a lighter color of this, but this has purple infused in it, if you can't tell that like pretty quickly, then your studying is not going to be as effective as if you just study one axis. That's why people do monochromatic paintings, to train their perception for painting. So this is how I studied. The black and white is grayscale is how I started, and I would say most people could use starting on grayscale. This is also why my color wheel is so big. So if I wanted to adjust something, I manually pick it. So if I wanted to adjust, say, this red, I want it to be a little bit lighter, a little bit desaturated. I go up a little bit. That's a little bit brighter, a little bit desaturated. I can do it in other ways, but this just gives me very fine manual control. It's all me. It's all, you know, I go in and I pick the color that I want exactly. I don't let the computer do, you know, weird stuff. If you guys like this content or find it helpful, just let me know. And I'll try to answer questions, but I don't spend too much time on social media answering things. But hopefully I answer some of your questions about how to progress with color studies and improving the coloring aspect of painting. See you next time.